But I certainly have had periods of my life where I was obsessed with it, maybe for 10, 12 years, where I was very much living my life as a fitness trainer. It became my identity. So because of that, I'm able to pull out and have this very much balanced approach. Hello and welcome back to the Smart Strength Training podcast. This is episode 20, and I've titled this podcast, Do You Have to Be Obsessed to Get in Great Shape? Now, normally on this podcast, I talk about evidence-based topics, highlighting the research, maybe debunking some myths, or I'll answer your questions. But I'm taking a slightly different angle for this one. And I want to cover a statement made to me recently because it got me thinking. Someone recently said to me that I was obviously obsessed to be in shape. Now, I hate the expression like getting in good shape or being in good shape, because obviously being in shape is very subjective and people work out for all kinds of reasons. But if we just put that aside for now and just say, what are the general reasons that the majority of people have started exercising? It's going to be to lose fat and to gain muscle. And I just did a quick Google to look to see what are the physical attributes that are considered necessary to be in great shape. And what came back was body composition, so a good ratio of fat mass to muscle tissue, strength, so a high level of strength across all muscles, endurance, so a good level of cardiovascular fitness, and then flexibility and mobility, so good joint flexibility and muscular elasticity. So if I was to ask you, what do you think are the key requirements for a person to excel at all of or any of those points? I would imagine you'd instantly go to effort and time, which is, of course, true. But that also makes out that it's a completely level playing field for all of us, and we all have exactly the same ability to get, quote unquote, in great shape. And I just don't think that's true. And that's why I wanted to do this podcast episode. So there's 5 things I think are really important just to consider. Number 1 is your starting point. So recognizing that if you're obviously trying to lose body fat and someone's got a lot of body fat to lose, that is a different start point. And if someone's trying to get to be a bodybuilder, but they're naturally a very skinny frame, once again, very different starting points. I remember years ago, I did a course with Charles Poliquin. Sadly, Charles Poliquin is no longer with us, but at the time was considered to be one of the best educators out there. And he said something that I thought was quite interesting on stage. He said, the best piece of advice I can give someone is to never gain a significant amount of fat mass, because if you've got a lot of fat to lose, that means you're going to be having to eat a caloric deficit. That means you're not eating enough energy, of course. So that's not going to fuel performance. You're not going to be able to optimize yourself as a person day to day going to work. And it's quite a good point. It's very hard for someone that's got a lot of weight to lose to kind of get to that journey to then get into sort of like quote unquote great shape. And the same, obviously, as I mentioned, for someone that's trying to get on stage and their start point is very, very sort of slim and skinny. I also think on this conversation around sort of fat loss, it's important to point out, it's been interesting to see the Ozempic research over the last 1 to 2 years, because obviously people are losing a lot of weight, but what's coming out from the research is that of that weight loss, we're seeing a lot of people lose a significant amount of muscle tissue. Generally speaking, you look for like a 3-to-1 ratio of fat loss to muscle loss during a weight loss phase. But we're seeing the reverse of that during the Ozempic trials, where people were losing a 3-to-1 ratio of muscle to fat, which is an unacceptable ratio. And just important to point out, because if someone's losing a lot of muscle during their diet phase, that's going to be problematic. And both these situations put people, if they want to get to that mid ground where maybe I started from, they've got to work really hard just to get to that baseline before they can start to sort of excel at any of those kind of key attributes. Number 2 is genetics. Now, genetics is very much the fitness industry's dirty little secret, maybe alongside steroids and performance enhancing drugs. They play such a key role in all things to do with fitness. Let's talk about muscle tissue, building muscle. Some people gain muscle at a much, much faster rate than others. If you go and glance at any research paper when it comes to hypertrophy interventions, if I ever give you information about a research paper, I'm very, very likely going to give you the group pooled averages And I'm going to do that right now to sort of give you an example. So the research paper I'm talking about here, it was a 12-week resistance training intervention with complete novices. And novices are often used because it's the same baseline point. If I was to go into a research paper with someone that's never trained before, my rates of muscle building are going to be much slower because I have so many years of experience up to this point. So we're talking about complete novices with no resistance training and experience up to the start point. So let me give you the averages. So the average group increases in muscle tissue were 0.45 to 0.7 kilos of muscle tissue gained per month across the 12-week, 3-month intervention. However, the slowest responders on that same resistance research paper gained around 0.23 kilos per month, while the fastest gained between 0.9 up to 1.36 kilos per month. So that's exactly the same protocols. It's the same workout. They were all supervised sessions with a trainer. They were all did the equivalent amount of work. So same exercises, sets performed, and proximity to failure. But some people gained muscle 5 times faster than others. So for hypertrophy, some people need to work maybe 5 times longer or 5 times harder to achieve the same results as somebody else. Now, I would say that most personal trainers probably fall into the moderate responders or up to high responders, just because when you first start working out, if you're going to fall in love with something, you're generally going to be good at it. And that's why people sort of fall into particular, certainly when it comes to fitness, into sort of particular camps with it. And that's a point I want to point out on this next topic, because genetics play a role in things like flexibility as well. Think of it from this standpoint. Women are more flexible than men. Yoga is a more appealing to young women more than young men. Okay, I don't like generalizing, but I think we can generally suggest that is, or generally say that is accurate. Also, you see a lot of people that are hypermobile who do flexibility style training, yoga style training. Why? Because when they're early exposed to it, they're good at it and they're more likely to stick to it. If you look at it right now, the gymnastics is on. And it's really true in a sporting setting. When you have sprinters versus endurance athletes, sprinters need to have a high amount of type 2 muscle fiber type, probably have more androgen receptors in their lower body and a greater level of baseline testosterone, which makes them genetically predispositioned to be powerful. Whereas an endurance runner is going to be better fat adapted. They're going to be a slimmer frame and have a higher level of type 1 muscle fibers, because when we do things when we're young and we're good at them, we are more likely to stick to them. And then when it comes to fat loss and genetics, they also play a key role. Now, these can be quite heavily debated topics. This is certainly a list that I've got myself into some online arguments about before. So let's go through some of the key genetic factors that play a role in someone's ability to lose fat. Now, we recognize that people have different baseline basal metabolic rates. So 2 people of the same body weight can have very differing resting basal metabolic rates. There's an argument that this could be influenced by lifestyle up to that point, because most people don't start losing weight and stepping foot into metabolic chambers until later in life. And you could argue that muscle tissue plays a big part in how high someone's resting metabolic rate is. We also recognize that appetite regulation is different across people. Some people are hyper hungry when they do certain forms of exercise, resistance training, and just exercising as a whole. So we recognize that appetite is very different from person to person. Fat storage and fat distribution as a whole is also very different from one person to the next. Certainly across the sexes, we see in men, they hold more body fat around the midsection, whereas for women, it's more likely to be in the lower body and at the hips. Insulin sensitivity is also different between people. Some people have a much better insulin sensitivity at baseline than others. Again, there's a big lifestyle element to that and how much it plays into it. Fat oxidation. So again, women generally oxidize fat better than men, but there are certain women and certain men that have much better usage of fat as a primary fuel source. You also look at research into different diets. Some people respond really, really well to something like the ketogenic diet, where others respond really poorly to it. So we recognize there are all these things that play into the genetic factors when it comes to those elements of being in kind of quote unquote great shape. I said at the start about your start point coming into it, and I kind of alluded during the genetics that actually How young you are when you're exposed to these things is also really important. I know there's that kind of argument that as we get older, our metabolic rates slow down, which is in part true, but not to the magnitude that most people think. And most of the reduction in metabolic rate is aligned to a loss of muscle tissue, which is actually totally reversible with a training intervention. But what we have to recognize is as we become older, we have more responsibilities, we have families to look after, maybe people are climbing a career ladder, aging relatives you have to look after, longer commutes to work, maybe an accumulation of injury as pain as a whole. Sleep might be poor and other lifestyle factors, maybe like an over reliance on alcohol, cigarettes, and using food as stress management. So the earlier in life someone starts to get into those lifestyle factors and kind of get them in place, it really sets them up well for their ability to kind of get in quote unquote great shape, which leads really nicely into number 3, which is of course lifestyle. And I know it sounds a bit wanky, but fitness really is a journey and it is a lifestyle that you have to start and stick to. Exercise, fitness, it's not something you can pick up and put down. It's something you adopt and just become as part of who you are. That being nutrition, staying active, getting to bed early, staying hydrated, all the kind of key pillars of exercise and fitness are things that need to become the sort of fabric of who you are as a person. And that's not to say you have to do them all the time and be excelling at them all the time, but most people will have elements of those in place at the majority of the time. Certainly, again, the conversation is around these people that appear to be in quote unquote great shape. Number 4, finally, is education. There's a lot of nuance and differing opinions in fitness, and people might come at this from very different angles and consider that person to be in great shape. Someone might be 100% plant-based, do yoga and Pilates, and you can see them to be in great shape. Whereas if you swing into the other end, there could be a bodybuilder, potentially they could be taking steroids, but they exist as quite extreme personalities. They might carry their meals with them everywhere they go. They carry those like a gallon water bottle to make sure they're staying super hydrated. They're getting their blood work done 3-4 times per year, and they're having every element of what they do completely dialed in. They are different ends of the spectrum. They have different educations and beliefs around food, but they certainly have an education around it. So for a lot of people that are kind of confused about what they should be doing, there's more likelihood of bouncing from one camp to the next and maybe not sticking to the same thing. So someone's education and sort of just like beliefs in the principles they're going to stick to, of course, people's principles might change slightly. But if they're changing a lot, that probably is going to be problematic for their ability to kind of like get in quote unquote great shape. So let's circle back to that question. Do you have to be obsessed to be in great shape? Like, no, you really don't. You haven't got to have every single thing dialed in to be in great shape. I think that's probably what bothered me a little bit. Like, I haven't got every single thing dialed in. Nutrition and hydration. You need to make sure that you're pretty good. 80% of the time, you're pretty much on it. Overall activity, you want to be the kind of person that is generally trying to be as active as possible. And you also have to recognize that at different parts of people's lives. So for parents, that one off, certainly for young parents with young children, that's a really hard thing to have in place. This person probably needs to be exercising the majority of the time, or not every day, but they're keeping with their training like over the course of a calendar year. They've got some sort of focus on their sleep and recovery, and they probably have something in place for stress management. Either they don't have a very stressful job, or they have things to help them get through stressful times. But for some people, they might need to be a little bit obsessed at first, because you kind of do need to fall in love with the process. It's really great to see people that get involved in CrossFit or High Rocks, and they're going kind of all in on those principles. They're logging their workouts. They've got their Whoop strap or their Aura ring. They go on fitness holidays and they surround themselves with fitness-minded people. So they get into that headspace to succeed. And that's great. For some people, that will work really well. But for someone else, they might be able to just get all those things that I spoke about, like multiple plates spinning at once, like the hydration, nutrition, overall activity, exercise, sleep recovery, and stress management. Some people are just very, very good at coming in at that kind of like moderation and then just keeping going with it and sort of like being able to manage all those things without being fully obsessed at it. And for me, like I mentioned, I don't consider myself to be obsessed with it, But I certainly have had periods of my life where I was obsessed with it, maybe for 10, 12 years, where I was very much living my life as a fitness trainer. It became my identity. So because of that, I'm able to pull out and have this very much balanced approach. So for me, the line everything in moderation works because it's layered on top of an early start point, maybe favorable genetics, well-established lifestyle habits, and a half decent education on the topics. But for others, maybe a little bit of obsession, passion might be exactly what they need. And the expression everything in moderation, if said to the wrong person at the wrong time in their life, can be really terrible advice, even though I think it is the right approach and it's where I think most people ideally should end up. We have to appreciate that we're all coming at this from very different points, different start points, different paths. So their path might be very different to my own. But I do believe there needs to be an element of sort of falling in love with the process. Not all the time, but you have to enjoy eating healthy and you have to enjoy just exercising for the kind of health benefits and the way it makes you feel. It's not the sort of thing that I want someone to be only picking up as part of their weight loss goal. It needs to be just that thing that kind of constantly there in the background. And for those people that have friends or co-workers or loved ones that see what you do and they think that is obsessive, then kind of so be it. And then finally, just to sort of finish up on this topic, one of the other reasons that I wanted to discuss this overall topic is in my next podcast, I'm doing a 2-part series on this idea of what's the difference between staying in shape and getting in shape in the first place. Because weight regain after a fat loss phase and what happened when I build muscle and then I stop training because I've had kids or I go on a holiday and I'm going to lose all my gains. They were the topics that I actually had listed as my next 2 podcasts. But I felt like this one was a really nice way to kind of like come in at that because it highlights the sort of journey that people are going to be going on to get to the point that the conversations around not losing your gains becomes really, really important. But that's enough from me. What do you think? I'd love to hear from you about how obsessed have you been? Are you right now to get into the shape or the position or whatever it is in exercise that you want to get to? Have you had to go all in with it and be super, super obsessive or not? Have you been able to manage quite a nice moderation approach and get there? Because it's always great to hear from you guys and get some firsthand experience.